A few months ago, my company announced that we were going to be working from home through at least June of 2021. That's 8 months from now. That's 8 months without working with coworkers in person. That's 8 months of being in this house with every non-work distraction making itself known constantly. That seems very stressful to me. I didn't even have my own space to work. So I decided to build myself an office. And not only did I want an office, but I wanted a place that was kind of permanent, that was mine, that I could cozy up inside of. One of the first parts of an office that makes it feel official is building myself the perfect desk. So I set about on a quest to build the perfect desk. That's what I'm going to tell you about today. Time that I've been working from home, I've used 2 different dining tables as desks, and while technically they did work as desks, they weren't really the ideal situation. I looked around online and watched many reviews of standing desks to figure out what I wanted. There were a lot of promising candidates out there, but none of them really felt perfect. I really like the confidence that Uplift Desks has about their desks. I mean, you can buy a hammock for your desk. But I didn't really like any of the tops. All of the top options were either cheap, and they were cheap, or they were really expensive but looked nice. None of them really fit what I was looking for. I knew I wanted a standing desk, because I want to be able to switch between sitting and standing and go back and forth freely. So I bought a base for a standing desk from Uplift Desks and decided to build my own desktop. The base I bought was the 24-inch commercial standing base. I went with the 24-inch instead of the 27-inch so that I could have a shallower desk depth. Because I'm planning on having my monitors on arms, I didn't need as much depth for the stands, and the smaller footprint lets the room feel a little bit larger. The only difference between the commercial version and the standard version is the commercial version can go down a little lower, and the commercial version has a crossbar. The crossbar really only makes a difference at the max height, which is where I use my desk most often, and the crossbar really does help make it feel a little bit sturdier. I've never really built anything on my own before, so building this desktop was going to be a real project. If I had known how much work it was going to be, I probably would have gone a different route. I started by figuring out what size desktop I actually wanted. I sat down at a bunch of tables and a bunch of desks, measured different sizes and heights to figure out really what I wanted. I realized that if I had my monitors on arms instead of stands, I'd have a lot more surface area on my desk to actually work with. I also realized that I don't like exceptionally wide desks. They feel big and fancy, but they take up so much space inside the room that they feel kind of domineering and take over the entire room, and I didn't want that for my office. I got 4 1x8s that were 6 feet long. I then joined them together and added dowels to give a little bit of extra strength. I planed and sanded the top of the newly joined boards a little too much. I then applied many coats of stain and polyurethane while sanding between each coat. This produced an exceptionally smooth surface that had an interesting weathered-like appearance. It's not exactly what I had intended, but I do like how it turned out. I put it all together, and it wasn't great. The cable management was terrible. It looked like a fire hazard with so many wires hanging off the back. The desk was so thin that I had to use these pieces of scrap wood just to make the desk thick enough so that the monitor arms had something to hold on to. I decided to upgrade my desktop. I took everything off of it and removed the top from the base. I then measured and cut supports for the desk and built a custom cable tray. I wasn't entirely sure if the cable tray I built would hold together, so I used an excess of screws. I think it'll stay. I then repeated the process of sanding, staining, and applying the polyurethane to the newly added edges, and I did it once more on top just for good measure. I think it'll last. Now, with the reinforced top, I reattached the top to the base. It was much more secure. With the desktop secured to the base, it was finally time to add things to the top of the desk and really make it mine. The first thing to add was my computer. I just use what my work gives me, and I have to use that, so as long as I'm working from home, my daily driver is a 15-inch MacBook Pro. Once I'm through working from home every day, I plan on moving my iMac down here and using this as my casual work from home office. Because I want as much as possible lifted off the desk surface, I got a stand for my laptop. But unfortunately, this means that I need to use a keyboard and mouse separate from the laptop itself. I prefer to have my trackpad on the left side of my keyboard so that my mouse can be closer to the middle of the desk and I don't have to reach as far. I also prefer to use a keyboard without a 10 key unless I'm using a trackpad more than a mouse. To handle power, I got an 8-outlet power strip that I could screw into the cable management I had built. To make sure that I had the right number of outlets, I created a wiring diagram for what my desk might look like with everything plugged in. This worked as expected, and I was able to make sure everything was plugged in where it needed to go. It was then time to add my favorite feature of the desk, a built-in wireless charging pad. To secure the wireless charger in place, I screwed a piece of scrap wood in so that it can rotate freely in case I need to adjust the wireless charger. Since there was still some wiggle room, I took the head from a foam brush that I used for applying stain and squished that between the piece of scrap wood and the wireless charger. I added the wireless charger near a knot in the wood so that it would be real easy to see where I should put my phone to have it charging on the top of the desk. This was an ideal situation and the wireless charging works flawlessly. Since I'm working from home all the time now, having an ideal video conferencing setup is absolutely critical. I built my entire setup on a single stand that sits on the back of my desk. It has lighting, sound, and video all on the same stand. Everything is on a separate arm and is completely adjustable easily. I can move the lighting however I want and the sound independently of that. And the camera sits right on its own little stand and it's adjustable by height and angle. For my camera, I use a Canon EOS R, which is absolute overkill. It's way more camera than is necessary for video conferencing, but it works well and the image quality is incredible. The biggest thing to note about using a big camera as a webcam is that you want to make sure that your camera has autofocus while in video mode or live view mode. The bigger sensor combined with the bigger lenses generally means that you have a shallower depth of field, and that can make it far too easy to go out of focus while on a call. Autofocus fixes that problem, and for me, the only camera that I have that has autofocus in video is the Canon EOS R. To make sure that my camera is always ready to go, I use a dummy battery that I plugged into an outlet. To get the video from my camera to my computer, I use the HDMI out on my camera and run that to a cheap USB capture card. I used to use an Elgato Camlink 4K, but then I saw someone post a link to a cheap knockoff on Amazon and I was curious. So I figured for less than $20 I could get something that might work just as well, but wouldn't bog down my computer resampling a 4K signal. If it didn't work, I'd just return it and go back to the Camlink. Well, I tried it out and it's great. It only takes in a 1080p signal, so my computer has less to process than the 4K signal from the Camlink. The image looks good and there were no additional drivers I had to install. It really was just plug and play. It's worth mentioning that there does seem to be a bug where sometimes when I launch video conferencing software, that the image will be in 16:9 squished down to 4:3. If I launch Photo Booth and then select the USB capture card as the image, then the issue automatically resolves, so it's not really that big of a deal. And considering this device only costs $20, it's an absolute steal. It's a great option, especially considering the Elgato Camlink 4K is sold out just about everywhere, and where you can find it, it's still really expensive. So I would go with this cheap option from Amazon every single time. The next part of my video conferencing setup is lighting. While I do have these LED panels overhead, I wanted a key light that was fully adjustable just for video conferencing. So for my key light, I'm using this 18-inch round LED panel that I got off of B&H. I wanted a thin panel that didn't need any extra support or diffusion. This panel was exactly that. It's thin, way more power than I need, a pretty large light source, and it's already fairly well diffused. It's so powerful that I pretty much never use it at a higher output than 30%. Finally, the last part to the setup is audio, arguably the most important part, and there are several parts to this setup. So one is the microphone that's on a stand, another is the interface that I use to hook it up to the computer, and then lastly is how I monitor and listen to calls. I've used several different microphones trying to figure out what the ideal setup is for me, and the setup that I have now I think is just about perfect. The first mic I used looks like a vintage mic, so when people would see it on a video call, they would always comment on it. It's a dynamic mic, so it only really picks up sounds close by, which helps when I've got kids running around throughout the house. But it wasn't that crispy of a sound, and I had to be right up on it while I was talking. I then took a huge upgrade to the CAD E100S. That's actually the microphone I'm talking on right now. And while it does sound fantastic, well, it actually sounds like nothing. It's a very transparent mic. It's very clear. This is what things actually sound like, but it's very accurate and it sounds pretty good. Listening to voices recorded on it sounds like you're in the room. It's quite pleasant. It has the advantage of me not needing to be right up on it for it to sound good. The disadvantages of it are that it is heavier, so I had to weigh down my stand more and make sure that everything was tightened down. It also picked up everything. If someone turned on a faucet in the house, I could hear it on the mic. Then I saw a video by Mike Delgado on Booth Junkie, where he had reviewed the microphone Synco D2, and he said that it sounded just as good as his Sennheiser MKH416. And I'm like, really? Can it sound that good? Well, it does. It sounds really good, and it's only about a quarter of the price. So I ended up buying it and trying it out, and it sounds great. It's a really good mic for video conferencing, better than you'd expect. One of the big benefits to it is it has a very focused pickup pattern, and so you can have it overhead or out of frame, and so you're not really paying attention to the fact that there's a microphone that you're talking into, and it makes it a little bit more freeing and a little bit easier to talk to people over a video conference. I'm a big fan of not being able to see the tools that you're using, where the tools just kind of disappear into the background. And this microphone is one of those tools. And I've got the Synco D2 on its own boom arm, which also makes it easier to be able to adjust and move out of the frame or to a different place, or if I'm not on conferences for a while, just really push it out of the way completely so I don't see it at all. I then have cabling for that mic running up the boom arm and down the stand that it's on, and then under the desk and into the audio interface. The mic is plugged in via a Scarlett 2i4 audio interface. That's plugged into my computer via USB. The thing that really makes this setup amazing is the headphones. Well, not just the headphones, but the way that the headphones work with this whole setup. See, with an audio interface, you can actually take the microphone and monitor it through your headphones. And so what that means is that when I'm on a call, I can pipe in a little bit of the sound from the microphone and have that going through my headphones. So while I'm wearing headphones, it doesn't feel or sound like I'm wearing headphones because I can still hear myself. And that makes it feel a lot more natural, like I'm talking to someone over a video conference in the room with me. And that is a great feeling. As I've mentioned a couple times, one of my biggest goals for this desk was making sure that I could get everything off of the desk surface, and so that way I could clear it off and have a clean working space very easily, very quickly, and very efficiently. And I think I've really achieved that with this setup. This effectively gives me even more surface area to work on in my office. It also creates a minimalist feel while having the convenience of everything that I need right at my fingertips. With the video conferencing arm in place and my laptop on its stand, it was time to finally add the monitor arms. I got 2 identical arms off of Amazon from the brand Loctech. These arms came from a recommendation from Sarah Dietschy, Rhymes with Peachy, also another great YouTube channel. Maybe I watch too much YouTube. Nah, not possible. What I found interesting is that the monitor I have was so light that the arm would just spring up to full height with just the slightest nudge. It's very annoying. To fix this problem, I added a whole bunch of screws to a cloth bag and then tied the bag to the back of the monitor. This added just enough weight so the monitor arm behaves as expected. The monitor arm comes with channels for routing cables through, which I greatly appreciated. This allows me to use the USB ports on the back of the monitor as a USB hub and to discreetly route the cables so it doesn't look like a hub. One of the problems that I realized that I didn't like with my first desktop setup was that I was only using one monitor on one arm. So I decided to add the second arm. To keep everything neat and tidy, I purchased many cable ties, and I used a lot of them. I also got some cable wraps. The cable ties are really good at keeping things as compact as possible, while the cable wraps make exposed cabling look neat and orderly. The last little addition that I really like is a small USB-powered digital clock. I suspended mine on the video conferencing arm. This allows me to glance slightly to the side and be able to see what time it is while I'm on a call. I can't stress enough how helpful it is to know what time it is in a meeting without needing to make it look obvious like I'm looking at the time. With the desktop built, 2 monitors on top, a mess of cable management underneath, and everything connected how I like, my desk is in the perfect state for me.